Hello there, I'm Kevin May. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire. Welcome to our last pulse of 2021, Emerging Innovation, and this is our 9th event this year. This outing for Pulse is sponsored by Travelport. Our huge thanks to them as always, and it's a little different actually from previous events, which are designed to complement the large conferences that our sister brand Focusrite produces in Europe and in the spring, and the US event in November, which we've actually all just returned back from safely, and it was wonderful seeing colleagues and contacts once again. So please visit travelport.com to find out more about its work in distribution, technology, and other services for agencies and suppliers. So far in our Pulse events, we've covered a broad range of subjects: COVID, health and safety, loyalty, social media, security, payments, digital marketing, alternative accommodation, and most recently in October, startups and investments. This month, as I said just now, we're not picking on a particular segment or issue, but instead taking a look at some of the emerging innovation and technology which we're asking you to take note of for 2022. Our annual Hot 25 Travel Startups list, published the same week as the conference in the US, is actually a good indicator of what some of the tools and services that might be moving the needle a little bit in 2022. But for today, we're going to focus deliberately on a few key areas that are ripe for innovation and technology to push them forward. So, your schedule over the next 90 minutes is as follows. Our comrade at Focusrite, analyst Peter O'Connor, who is also a professor of strategy at the University of South Australia, will be talking with Linda Fox about some of the innovation and tactics that might be deployed in the marketing that surrounds our industry. Mitra Sorrells then takes on the complex but fast developing world of SSI with Nick Price. He's the chair of SIG, the Decentralized Industry Identity Foundation, and Jamie Smith of Evernym. I'll be back then for a discussion with Kit Brennan. He's a co-founder and a director of Thrust Carbon, which incidentally was one of our Hot 25 companies for 2022. We'll be talking about bringing innovation to the world of sustainability in the travel industry. Mitra then returns for a chat with Mark McLaughlin. He's the CEO at Chorus, who is also working on a new process behind loyalty partnerships and their respective programs. The penultimate interview is conducted by Jill Menz, our news editor, who is talking to the head of Visit Iceland about new roles and strategies for destinations. And then I get to interview our boss. How about that? That's Focusrite Managing Director Pete Como about the role of innovation and what is genuine, what to look out for, what sticks, and what often quickly disappears. So that's your lineup for this month and our final pulse of 2021. I actually say this at every Pulse event, but I particularly want to give an enormous amount of credit to my colleague Jean Coe, who has the unenviable task of putting up with me, but also making sure these events always run to time and smoothly throughout the year. And while some of his intro music selections can be somewhat questionable, this one's pretty good, Jean, thank you. He makes up for it with a tireless attitude and attention to detail. So thank you very much, Jean, for all your work this year. Also to Mitra, Jill and Linda, who've also been terrific when putting these events together. And I hope are looking forward to some well-deserved rest over the Christmas and New Year break. Cheers to them for everything. As always, thanks to all our guests, indeed to all our guests during the whole of our 2022 schedule for Pulse. We greatly appreciate your time and expertise and being willing to share both of those where our audience is. Okay, as always, so each of our sessions today will be replayed on Focuswire in the coming weeks, so don't panic too much if you have to drop out at any point. Thanks again to Travelport for supporting this particular event. Focuswire Pulse will return in 2022, beginning in February and then going quarterly over the course of the following year. That's it for me. I wish you all a very Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Jean, over to you, sir.
I'm Linda Fox, Senior Reporter Focuswire, and I'm here with Peter O'Connor. He's Professor of Strategy at University of South Australia and also a Senior Analyst for Focusrite. Welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Linda. Good to see you again. Good to talk with you.
So let's start. We only got 15 minutes here. Scene setter kind of question is the direct trend in the past 2 years with COVID is for hotels to get as much business direct, and it seems it's been quite successful. So moving forward now, can hotels kind of nurture and continue to capitalize on that trend, or do you think OTAs are going to recover momentum?
Linda, I would say I'm absolutely certain that the OTAs are going to recover momentum. I think this trend that we've seen with the shift back towards direct booking it's been caused by two different issues. One is the change in the mix of domestic and international clients. So we've had a lot of people who are limited to traveling domestically or maybe even just regionally. And as a result, they've been contacting the hotels directly. They've been looking for safety and security information. And yeah, that's still going to continue. But as we get more international clients, you're going to see that that's going to reduce in terms of its importance. For me, I'm an Irish guy. If I wanted to book a hotel in Ireland, I would probably know which hotel I would want to book and I would be able to contact them directly. But if I'm going somewhere a bit more exotic, I don't have that knowledge. Now, can hotels actually try to capitalize on this trend? They need to do a lot more work than they're currently doing. People have been contacting them for safety and security information, and they've been sharing that over the phone and their websites. What we're starting to see now, of course, is that the OTAs are sharing that information as well. And a great example is Booking.com's new badge, which they're allowing hotels to apply for to certify that they are actually sustainable and behaving in an eco fashion. That's something that's very, very valuable, and it's going to eat away in terms of the advantage that the hotels had. So if they want to maintain this advantage, they're going to have to work much, much harder at reaching out to their customers.
Okay. So now from an OTA perspective, do you think, go back to their kind of old marketing tactics and pouring billions into Google?
That's an interesting question, because I think starting with Airbnb, but then Booking.com and Expedia as well, they've all said they don't want to go back to that.
Exactly.
What I've seen in the last couple of months is that they're starting to go back. They're starting to invest more heavily in paid search advertising again. And that's a big, big challenge, because the big winner in this is going to be Google. Google has... Yeah. We call it the Google tax, because effectively, if you want to acquire new customers, you're going to end up paying Google somehow, either directly through your own paid search marketing or through the OTAs who have to reach out to their customers to actually do that as well. So I think we're going to get back to the same kind of situation where companies like Booking.com and Expedia are among Google's biggest customers across all sectors very, very, very quickly.
So we haven't learned anything then, have we?
Definitely not. We've said we've learned things, but it's easy to go back to the old ways. One of the challenges is there's very little originality happening in terms of travel marketing right now. There's very, very few new ideas. So what do? We fall back on the old standards.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's just talk about what might be those new ideas. I mean, we've seen some really clever use of social media. Companies like Hopper would say that, they don't invest, these billions in Google, that they use social media really effectively. Is that not something that you think we'll see the OTAs leaning more heavily on?
I don't think we'll see the OTAs leaning more heavily on it. I think we'll see the end producers, be they the hotel companies, the airlines, even tour operators, if they manage to recover, leaning more heavily into the social media aspects and all aspects of the customer journey. So from everything from the inspiration to the actual selection process, building up relationships with customers, and then allowing the customer to stay or complete their travel, and then maintaining contact with them afterwards. And the critical thing is maintaining that relationship, so when they need to do another booking, they come back to that supplier again. Now, it's a lot of effort. People have this impression that social media is easy and cheap and fast and so on. But in reality, it requires a lot of skill. It requires a lot of technical expertise and tools in order to make it work properly. So, travel suppliers that want to make use of this media, they're going to have to end up investing majorly in order to get it to work well.
So what about subscriptions then? You talked about, loyalty there really, and also as a marketing tactic. Do you think that's going to catch on more?
Within travel, I think there's a big opportunity. We've seen with eDreams Adagio, they've been very, very successful in terms of what they've done over the last, 2 years?
2 million subscribers
really,
or something.
Yeah, and I would call it the Costco model, where basically you're getting people to pay up front and you're giving them something real and tangible in terms of maybe it's a discount, maybe it's special conditions and so on when they actually make their bookings. And we've seen in the retail sector, we've seen with Amazon Prime, that this is a way of tying people into your company. When you look at it at a very, very surface level, it looks like it's expensive. But in reality, imagine you're giving people a 10% discount. When you look at the customer acquisition cost that most companies are paying when they're driving bookings through paid search or through meta search, 10% is nothing. And of course, it's one shot when you actually do it through search, while when you have a subscription model and you tie people into your company, you can have them come back again and again and again. I was looking recently at the business model of Costco, and Costco has something like a 92% resubscription rate. So, they're definitely doing something right. And that's cash in their pocket up front before they sell anything. Yeah. I think we're going to see some of the hotel chains, some of the airlines come up with some very interesting ideas. During COVID, we saw some very interesting ones. We saw Citizen M, for example, with a package of a couple of days plus meeting space and so on. I don't think it even needs to include accommodation. What it needs to do is it needs to give the customer a reason to keep coming back to you again and again and again. And kudos to eDreams for being the first of the big travel providers or platforms to actually take the risk and put that together. I'm very, very glad it's working out for them.
It's interesting that you say it wouldn't even have to include accommodation, because Accor Local, Sebastian Bazin has tried that, hasn't he? And he's trying again now. I mean, I don't know if it was too much too soon the first time round, but that idea of not perhaps including accommodation is interesting. You did mention meta search there. Now at the PhocusWire conference, there were some people saying, well, meta search is dead, but do you still see it as a very viable and growing form of marketing and distribution?
Well, meta search has got a new name. It's called Google. So Google
That's a
has
no
changed.
Then.
No, but I mean, let's be honest here. Google has changed its business model away from a CPC to a CPA, a cost per acquisition, and effectively it's meta search. And they're very, very smart here because it's much more attractive to travel suppliers because they only pay if it actually generates a booking, but they pay a substantial amount. So it reduces the risk for Google. That's great. Now, unfortunately, if you're a company like for example, like Kayak or somebody like that, it's going to be much, much more difficult for you to actually find your place where you've got Google before you and competing with you at the same time. So I think, the traditional travel meta search products, they're going to have to come up with something really interesting in order to actually keep their clients. Now, TripAdvisor has tried. TripAdvisor tried to go towards the subscription. They tried to go towards this cashback idea. All very interesting ideas, but it hasn't gelled with the customer. So there's some real innovation needed in order for these companies to actually maintain their business model and continue to be successful.
So are you seeing anything that might be kind of just emerging that could be a sort of, new and cool use of marketing for the future?
That's a really, really difficult question. I mean, I think we need to watch what's happening in retail in general. And retail in general is much further ahead than the travel sector for some reason. And when you start looking at, mainstream retail brands and companies like Amazon and Catch and so on, it's all about loyalty there. It's all about, customer lifetime value. It's not about single shot transactions. And that's really, I think, the way that we need to go. In the travel industry, we don't have loyalty programs. We have rewards programs. And to be honest with you, rewards programs that don't work very, very well. So I think somebody needs to figure out what's going to actually develop a real relationship with their customer base and implement something that will keep them coming back. You mentioned Accor with its All program. I think it's really, really interesting. As you said, maybe it was a little bit early. And the more I hear Bazin talking about the All program, I keep thinking about this idea of the mega app. So, WeChat
super app
of travel,
strategy.
the super app. Yeah. I keep thinking of that idea, and Accor's got its finger in so many pies. There was even talk at one stage of investing in Air France. Maybe for the European marketplace, they could actually create something like that, which would reach out to customers in so many different ways that you effectively wouldn't have a choice except to actually participate in their ecosystem.
Yeah, well, actually, that's interesting, because that brings me on to Booking Holdings and all of the acquisitions it's making. And again, you're going to be hard put going forward not to cross over into its ecosystem. That's clearly what it wants. But are they in danger of getting too big now, do you think?
Well, Booking, as we already know, Booking is a very, very big company when you look at it as a proportion of the OTA market. But when you look at it as a proportion of the travel market, the overall travel market, it's not such a big company. And, a large proportion, and I'm talking primarily here about Europe, which is Booking's kind of core market still, a large proportion of the market has been taken up traditionally by tour operators. And one of the things we've seen as a result of COVID is that the tour operator segment has really, really, really decreased. The traditional package tour. We had Thomas Cook, which went out of business beforehand. TUI, and you've got a lot
he says
of
they're going after dynamic packaging a lot more, doesn't he? So perhaps
that's exactly where they need to go. The traditional package, I think, is not going to come back. Being able to offer people flexibility. Now, is it going to be TUI that's going to do it, or is it going to be Booking.com that's going to do it? Booking.com now has the accommodation part. They have the flight component, which they've now brought in-house to reduce the strategic threat. They have things like OpenTable. They have some activities. Again, in terms of the super app of travel, they could possibly get there. So I think that makes sense. The Get-A-Room investment, I think, gives them a lot more leverage in the US and allows them to grow in the US market, where the Booking.com brand name has really been, much lower than the Expedia, Hotels.com brand names, because they never invested in branding until a couple of years ago. Now, is it too big? I don't think it's too big, because it's a small percentage of a very, very large market. And as I said, I think the place that they're going to take market share from now is not from suppliers, but they're going to take market share away from what we used to call the tour operating segment. If you start looking in markets like France, there are so many tour operators that have gone out of business. There's so many tour operators that are really, really struggling. And the ones that are being successful are the ones that, just like you said, focus on that dynamic packaging area, or else are extremely niche. And as a result, they're going to stay small.
Okay, let's move on here. Demise of cookies. What kind of do you see emerging as a way of targeting customers online?
Well, I mean, to be honest, cookies are a fairly archaic technology anyway. The large marketing companies that want to target you can use other technologies like digital fingerprinting in order to identify you if they want to. So, really, I don't think the demise of cookies is a big issue. The ones that have the skill and the tools to be able to target you will just switch to another technology. They're really the exceptions rather than the rule. The vast majority of the travel sector, the medium-sized and smaller companies, never used it in the first place. Now, what are they going to have to do? They've really got two challenges. They got to acquire customers the first time, and they got to bring customers back. And where the cookie component was really powerful was in terms of acquiring the customer the first time, targeting advertising, retargeting, targeting on Facebook, and so on. That's now gone. So what are these companies going to do? They're going to use the online travel agencies. That's why I'm so bullish on the online travel agencies, because I think the OTAs are going to be, once again, the demand collection media for many travel suppliers. Now, what the hotels and other travel suppliers have got to do much better job of is, once they've got that customer, making sure that they keep in contact with that customer, make sure that if that customer is going to come back, or if that customer is going to go on another trip, that they consider people within their brand or within their network. So I think we're going to see much more emphasis on online marketing, not the search component, but basic things like email marketing, which is horrendously effective still to this day, and what we talked about earlier on, social media marketing, maintaining, building, and leveraging the relationship with the customer.
Peter, it's a great way to end there. Thank you so much for your time. Peter O'Connor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome. I am joined by two of the people really on the front lines of the work that is being done around self-sovereign digital identity. Nick Price was CIO and CTO at Mandarin Oriental Hotel Group, then founded Netsys Technology, and since February, he has also been the informal chair of the Hospitality and Travel Special Interest Group within the Decentralized Identity Foundation. Nick, welcome.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
And Jamie Smith is Senior Director of Business Development at Evernym, a leading developer of systems to enable decentralized digital ID, maybe best known as the technology provider behind IATA's Travel Pass. And just last week, Evernym was acquired by Avast, a global cybersecurity firm. Welcome, Jamie.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, Nick, we spoke in August, a very lengthy, detailed conversation. Really appreciated your insights on this topic. I encourage anyone listening who has not read that interview to do so on PhocusWire. One of the primary benefits that we briefly discussed then is better security for personally identifiable information. Can you just get us started by briefly running through some of the ways decentralized ID is inherently more secure?
Yes, I can. I'll try and be succinct because there's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, the model is different. That's what we have to remember here. What is the existing model? The existing model is that corporations largely collect large, relatively detailed but fairly inaccurate information about the customer and try and triangulate the customer when they see the customer in the sales funnel and say, well, that's Nick, let's apply this information. And the problem is the information isn't sufficiently accurate, particularly in travel and hospitality. It's extremely inaccurate, and it makes it very, very difficult to use well. The customer suffers because of it, but it equally creates a honeypot, a significant target for the bad guys out there to steal customer information. So in SSI, we do things very differently. The information is in control of the traveler at all times. It is limited in the amount of information that is shared. We have a thing called selective disclosure that can allow elements of a customer's information to be presented. And the important thing is that the receiving party can verify that this is exactly the person they're talking to, and the customer can verify this is the company they're talking to. So it's cryptographically proven that you don't have somebody in the middle. So that's really good. So minimizing the amount of information that corporations need to capture, because they're receiving with each engagement, with each conversation, with each message, they can receive the up-to-date information that they need. Why would they bother to store it?
Right. Okay. So we're getting rid of those massive databases potentially that, as you said, are kind of that honeypot for hackers, putting the control back in the hands of, in our use case, the traveler. Jamie, I know the IATA Travel Pass is a digital credential solution being used right now for verifying travel and health documents. In effect, COVID has created a bit of a perfect test case for the technology, I suppose. There are certainly other ways, though, that it could be used, and that a self-sovereign ID can be used just to improve the travel experience. Can you help us understand some of those possibilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Nick said, we're moving from a world where really almost like the master data record, rather than living with the organization, can live with the individual. So imagine putting all the information I carry around in my traveler wallet or my purse, and I put that on my phone. or I put that in a trusted place in the cloud. And that means I can now share that. And when the data is received, it can be verified instantly. And we know who it was given to, where it's come from, if it's been revoked, if it's been changed. And that changes the whole dynamic and changes the range of use cases that become possible. So as we see with the IATA travel pass, well, I've got my passport and my boarding pass, maybe my COVID vaccination status. But as you highlight, well, I can now share that with the car rental company. And I could share that with the hotel organization. I could share it with the taxi firm. I could share it with the restaurant that I'm in the city I'm staying for the weekend. So the opportunities become limitless. And in the last conversation, we were talking about, there's reward schemes across the travel and hospitality sector, but loyalty, not so much. And I think what becomes really powerful here is when the individual can now connect and share data about themselves privately, securely, and one of those technical terms, peer-to-peer. It means it's just me and the restaurant I'm sharing data with. It's just me and the hotel. And when the hotel wants to contact me, they can do so directly. There's no WhatsApp in the middle. There's no even email provider in the middle. It's just me and them. And that creates an explosion of opportunities to share new value, to create new business models, as well as privacy, security, and scalability, which is, as Nick said, is really exciting.
So maybe to help make some of this even a little bit more concrete for our viewers, can you share some of the use cases that are in development right now? Either of you or both of you.
Please, Nick, well, you go ahead.
Yes, certainly. Well, we've of course, in our last conversation, we highlighted 4 that we were working on at that point, and they have now been published. They're on the website of the Hospitality and Travel SIG under DIF. But we're now working really focusing in on a very, very important area, which is the area of seamless travel for the customer, and trying to make that a frictionless and value-added experience for all the participants throughout the travel journey. And that includes the providers of travel experiences, and as well as the consumers of travel experiences. So we have a broad seamless travel use case underway, but as part of that, we're also doing some interesting things. So we're also looking at self-sovereign identity for things as opposed to just individuals or businesses. And one of the things we're looking at is baggage, for example, which is a very interesting value-added contributor to a seamless travel experience if you can get it right. We're also currently developing some very good work around car and mobility rental. And as a backdrop to seamless travel, Jamie highlighted it in his earlier conversation around COVID credentials or health credentials. And we have an ongoing relationship with the Good Health Pass Collaborative, and some of the work that we're doing in seamless travel will actually make its way there, and we'll find it a vehicle to be published under Good Health Pass.
Well, yeah, that baggage example is kind of interesting, and maybe just briefly a little bit more on that. So in effect, a piece of luggage moving through the travel journey would be given an ID?
Yeah, possibly. It certainly could be. And I think you start from the perspective of saying, well, why do I schlep bags around? No, it's not a very pleasant thing to do. And if I didn't have to, if they could be picked up at my home, and I suddenly found them in my hotel room when I arrived, wouldn't that be better for everybody? And that's the kind of use case that we're talking about. Is where it's better for the individual, better for the providers, and it fundamentally changes the model, and it changes the economics, and it provides business opportunity for new ways of engaging and supporting the travel experience, and new companies to emerge.
And if I'm understanding correctly, and Jamie, maybe you can answer this. So, for example, the IATA Travel Pass that's currently in use can then potentially expand its capabilities to enable some of these other use cases that Nick has just outlined?
Exactly so. And I think there's it's this paradigm shift. We're moving from a world of how do I verify some data? Maybe I put it in a QR code and I ask the passenger to present it, and that gets a bit clunky because I've got something for my boarding pass and something else for my my passenger vaccine certificate information. Instead, we give the passenger a digital wallet, and they're in control of that data, and they can see who's been sent what. And as Nick actually alluded to, but it's worth calling the point out, maybe they don't need all the information. Maybe they just need, do I have the information, yes or no? And that can be trusted. Am I over 21? Yes or no? Okay. Am I flying today? Yes or no? You don't need to know where I'm going. And so that becomes really powerful. But then I can put anything in there. I can put my lounge access in there. I can put my disruption voucher because I'm sorry your flight was late. Here's a free meal. I can put my car rental agreement in here. Back as far as 2018, we did a project with a large bank where we were able to put your driving license, passport, and bank information in your phone as a credential. And then at the point of checkout, I can share the passport with the airline, the driving license with the car rental company, and the payment information to both. And that goes down existing rails. We're not, fundamentally changing the infrastructure for those providers. But I could do all that with one tap. It's like, we need this information. I say yes. And all that information goes with one tap. And then I can receive another credential that is my car rental agreement. And it goes on and on and on. So it really is opening up a new dawn of ecosystems, of loyalty programs, of partnerships, where we're bringing down the barriers to entry. We're bringing down the technical hurdles, all the integration required. It's really exciting.
Yeah, and certainly that sounds like potentially new opportunities for retailing in new ways.
Absolutely.
Throughout the travel journey. So I guess then the question becomes, you mentioned there are some of about the systems themselves. Can existing systems be retrofitted to accommodate this potentially new world? I'm thinking about in November, we covered the news that Marriott said that it will begin using the Amadeus central reservation system, touted as kind of the newest next gen technology. I didn't see any mention of SSI in any of that. So in that example, can SSI be incorporated into existing systems at a later date?
I'll have a swing at that, and then Nick could jump in. I think this is not about rip and replace. This is about enhance and extend. Okay. So think of it like, in a banking example, I still have my branches. I can still do my traditional banking, but I can also have a website that allows internet banking. Okay. I think the same thing's going to be true. We're going to have our existing channels, our existing ways of contacting customers, existing apps, even online portals and so on. But there's going to be this additional way, which is going to be much more convenient, much more seamless. And so this becomes like an extra layer that can help organizations better communicate with passengers and travelers, better share data, and better receive data that can be trusted. And it means that when a passenger wants a one-tap experience, the data can be received and then passed on to the existing kind of legacy infrastructure, if you like.
Okay. Nick, did you want to add anything to that?
I might add, yes, thank you. And it may be that the passenger, the traveler, actually doesn't realize initially that they're using SSI, because what we will see directionally over the coming years is that the wallet that Jamie talked about will actually be found underneath the skin of an app, and it actually will provide much of the functionality of a travel and hospitality app, but the front end of it will still be that branded skin, and it will be the app that you see today. The app will just do less, and it will enable the SSI fundamentals that we've talked about. It will enable that data sharing. And just as an example, one of the things that isn't very well understood, we talk about SSI. Jamie mentioned it, peer-to-peer. What does that really mean? That is a one-to-one connection between the traveler and the brand they're traveling to. It is open, it is permissioned, it is permanent. It is not just for the transmission of text messages. We can put rich messaging on top of it. We can put commerce on top of it. Now, if you think of it like that, what brand wouldn't want a direct line of sight communication that is permanently permissioned and open, to their best customers. So is this a rip and replace? No, it isn't. It is something that is very much additive, value additive. And the interesting thing here is that it's almost certainly most value additive for the best customer of the brand. That's where you would actually start here. And so it adds enormous value.
Can I just make one more point upon that?
Sure.
Once you realize this isn't just about data, and you open by talking about personal data and security, which is on everyone's minds. But once you change the conversation to being about this new direct connection, the passenger can turn it off whenever they want. If they're being bothered by it, it's their control. But here's the thing. I could use that to prove that it's me. So we've got one customer working on this idea of call in, log in, or walk in.
Okay.
So with that connection, we've just got rid of usernames and passwords. So I come back to the website, I scan a QR code, and it just lets me in. And then when I call the contact center, they say, "Hi, Mr. Smith. I'm just going to check it's you before we go any further." And rather than asking me for my date of birth, mother's maiden name, and my inside leg measurement, they're going to say, they're going to press a button on their screen. My phone's going to go ping, and it's going to say, "Are you on the phone to the contact center?" I say, "Yes." And I'm in. So it's going to be like this customer magic wand. And the business case for a travel provider is, I've just taken customer authentication, as it's called, from 30 seconds down to 5.
Yeah.
So this is real business benefit. And that's before we get into all the new revenue models, all the new upsell, customer lifetime value, all that stuff. So this really is disruptive innovation at the core of the value chain, of the customer experience. And I think it's, it's why we're so excited about this market.
Yeah, and
I recall, Nick, you described it as once in a generation disruptive technology.
It is once in a generation.
Hearing you both talk, I mean, it sounds to me, well, of course, this just makes so much sense. And gosh, the ability to remove some of those barriers and not have to remember passwords and all of that sounds great. Clearly, there must be some challenges to adoption. I mean, what is now the barriers, or what is any of the resistance you might be hearing? I mean, is it just a matter of time and staffing to be able to take on something new by some companies?
Awareness is probably one of the biggest barriers. It's just being aware that this capability exists, and it's in development, and it's in development by others for others, and it can apply to us. And within hospitality and travel, one of the interesting, most profound things is that this technology applies to us very, very well. We are a perfect set of use cases for self-sovereign identity and decentralized digital ID. It is profoundly beneficial, and it will find its way here. And that's really why we're doing the work that we're doing now. We form an outreach into the hospitality and travel community to put into hospitality and travel terms the technology that is being developed deep down in the weeds by others, and we've been very successful at that so far. Actually,
is there any particular part of the industry where this might be more easy to take on or more difficult? I'm thinking, hotel versus air versus cruise. I don't know.
Well, it's beneficial everywhere. We've already seen it in air. The IATA travel pass is a good example. I think one of the places that it will actually manifest is around loyalty, the opportunity to fundamentally restructure how a travel provider communicates with their best customer and provides value to that best customer is universal across whatever segment of the industry that you're looking at. It's not well done today. It's not highly value additive to the traveler. It is a discount channel often. We have the opportunity here to provide real value because the customer can express who they are and what they are in a trusted manner to the travel provider, who can equally then say, "Oh, I now know who I'm talking to. I know 100% this is Jamie Smith. Now, what, Jamie, would you like to buy from me? What can I sell to you?" That's a very, very different dialogue than we've been having for the last 30 years.
So we just have about a minute or so left as we're finishing up. I guess I would just ask both of you two questions. First of all, just a brief answer on beyond becoming aware, since you said awareness is the big holdup. Anything that you would say travel brands or tech suppliers should be doing to prepare for this opportunity? And then just a quick outlook, 5 years from now, will we be there? Oh no, I think we lost
Jamie's on
Jamie.
mute while he goes.
Apologies.
There we go.
I'll jump in. So I'll answer the second piece first. Absolutely. I think it's going to happen gradually and then suddenly. Okay. I think in 5 years' time, a significant proportion of customers who are interacting digitally will do so with some kind of digital wallet or do so with a self-sovereign identity capability. And that's being accelerated because the EU themselves are mandating that 27 member states are going to give citizens their wallets to use in this way. And I think things they should be looking at right now is just like all new innovation, start playing with it, understand how it works, make mistakes, and action over the theory. I think build and iterate and try things out, and that's exactly what we're doing at Avast. Okay. Wonderful. And Nick, anything to add to that?
I would just simply say wallet. Be aware of wallets. Wallets are much more than the crypto wallet that you may have or the wallet that you have on your iPhone. It is something profound. It is a travel and hospitality wallet that gives you access to your profile that's stored in the cloud and can present elements of your profile to traveler providers when you want. There's a big opportunity here, and it will shape the way travel and hospitality mobile experiences through apps look over the coming years. So this is an area that is current. There's a lot of information out there today, and come to the Hospitality and Travel SIG, and you'll meet people like Jamie from Avast, and we can help you.
Yes, and we will for sure put the link to your group when we publish the story on PhocusWire. So Jamie and Nick,
for me is to say, this is demos in days. This is not about a 3-month huge innovation project that doesn't bear fruit. This is giving it to real customers to play around with and getting real feedback.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, Jamie and Nick, thank you both so much. Really helping us understand this fairly complex topic. It's really kind of exciting, and look forward to following the progress in the coming months. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Bye.
Bye.
Kit Brennan from Thrust Carbon, thank you so much for joining us for our PhocusWire Pulse, our last one of the year. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And again, thank you for joining us.
Likewise. Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here.
Okay, so Thrust Carbon actually is one of our Hot 25 startups to look for in 2022. So we'll get the formalities out the way and say congratulations for that inclusion in 24 other really excellent companies as well. So congratulations on that. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about with this particular pulse is about emerging innovation, is the kind of the banner headline for this particular pulse this month, but in particular with relation to sustainability. So before we kind of dive into a little bit of that, I wonder if you could give us an overall sense of where you think the industry is at the moment, if you can be as broad as that, with the sustainability agenda.
Absolutely. So I think it's useful to break it down to two sides. You've got the consumer, the business side, and then you've got the travel industry side. In terms of the buyers, right, of the businesses that are buying, they're reaching a inflection point at the moment. In the past, ESG was normally a relatively informal process. But we're starting to see a real split where, there's the companies that are trying to continue as they always have done. And then there's those that are starting to take ESG, really seriously. And this is also happening with requirements being set by governments as well. So the UK large organizations having set net zero plans and goals. And then we've got things like the COP conference last month, which similar ideas where more and more requirements are being set on particular industries. And what that does is it filters down, and as a result, the travel industry is also hitting an inflection point where, you know, sustainability is becoming something that's here to stay, and it's also becoming a selling point. Businesses are choosing what travel supplies they go with based on their sustainability credentials. And so there's a land grab opportunity. Travel businesses that put sustainability forefront and offer innovation are starting to win clients that they otherwise had to compete with in the old way on price or you know, the same feature sets that everyone else had. Now they have a way of setting themselves apart to win new business. So it's definitely an exciting time for sustainability. You know, like everyone says, like around COP, everyone said sustainability, it still has a long way to go. That's so true. But also, we've never been further ahead as we are right now, which is great.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, before we get into some of the emerging tactics that are being used, it's probably worth briefly just reflecting on what are some of the prior tactics that were being used. Now, sadly, I've been writing about this industry far too long to remember when carbon offsets became a big thing. Back in the late 2000s, you know, I remember specifically lastminute.com made a big thing about you can offset your flight. And, you know, and you ask them a couple of years later, I'm not specifically singling out them, but many of those kind of OTAs that did things, you'd say, so how did you get on with the carbon offsetting? How many people were using it? And, you know, after it would take them weeks to reply, they would say, oh, not very many actually. So was that the main tactic that was being used at the time was carbon offsets and choose your hotel based on whether they clean your room once a week or once a day or something like that?
Yeah, precisely those two, to be honest. So offsetting was often the solution for everything. And don't get me wrong, offsetting still has a role to play, but it's come a long way. The old approach used to be, you know, tick a box, the money goes into a black hole. You don't know what it's supporting. You don't know how much of a markup, you know, the business is taking off it. You don't know if it's verified. And in a lot of cases, it wasn't. That's changed, as I'm sure we'll touch on in a minute, but ultimately, you know, highly verified offsets are becoming the norm, which is great. But then, you know, we've seen in the consumer space some of the innovations happening recently around point of sale information being provided. That wasn't a thing in the past. The prior tactics really were, at best, you might get a sustainability report after booking where the business could find out in the last financial year they had X number of flights and that emitted X thousand tons of CO2. That was it. And it wasn't enough information to make policy decisions on. All it really meant was maybe you could buy some offsets using that data. So we're certainly coming a long way, and yeah, the emerging tactics are starting to become really interesting. But certainly in the past, it really just came down to the offsetting and that really basic reporting.
Yeah. And we encourage people to go to look at the Thrust Carbon website because there's some things that you specifically do, Kit, with your organization. But what are some of the kind of the new technologies perhaps that might come along to help? And whether it's hardware, whether it's software, whether it's web-based tools and things like that either brands or consumers can be aware of that you think are going to start coming on the scene in 2022 and beyond?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple different solutions. There's what OBTs and TMCs can use for point of booking information, and we're seeing this in the consumer space with people like Google Flights, where you can see, you know, this is equivalent to X tons of CO2 when you book a flight. People never had that level of information before, and so we're seeing particularly the corporate travel industry starting to embrace this as well. In particular, Q1 next year, we're going to see some leading TMCs and online booking tools start to come out with displaying similar information. And that means at point of booking, someone can make a sustainable decision, and that's great. We then have post-booking reporting. Again, this is for TMCs to provide and for enterprises to directly acquire, and using really in-depth reporting, they can start to make better sustainability policy decisions. So understanding what business units are emitting, what trip purpose codes are being used, and what flights could be transitioned to rail, what airlines should a particular company use in order to start cutting down on those emissions. That's great. On the hardware side, we've obviously, there's all the talk around sustainable aviation fuels. That's really exciting. It still has a long way to go to become commonplace, but serious investment is happening there, particularly as long-haul electric aircraft will probably never be a reality due to physics. Hydrogen aircraft are still 30, 40 years away. So sustainable aviation fuels need to bridge that gap. So that's very exciting. And then I guess the last really cool tool that we're seeing is around carbon budgets. So just like you have a financial budget, if you want to cut down on your financial spend, doing exactly the same thing, setting carbon budgets so that on a department level, there is responsibility and accountability, and you can track those emissions as a travel manager to start to bring down and meet your net zero goals. So I think those are some of the most exciting innovations. And I guess the final one on a hardware side as well, of course, is electric vehicles. Yeah. The travel industry is so far behind on this. Hertz made their announcement 2 months ago that they were purchasing 100,000 Teslas. If that becomes a reality, that really will put them ahead of so much of the industry. Enterprises we talk to are crying out for electric vehicle options. So it's terrific if that becomes a reality. So I think that's a rough.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, you've referenced kind of the travel buyers department, and thinking about the carbon effect of a particular trip. I mean, do you sense that companies are building those into their budgets, because sometimes the carbon friendly option might not be the cheapest, and we're now in a state where companies are perhaps looking at their travel budgets a little bit more, because they're being a little bit more discerning, because their business travel is only coming back drip fed after what's been going on over the last 20 months. So are they being written into budgets that you should be a little bit more aware?
Yeah, they are. And it's exciting. And I think it's exciting for the travel industry as well, because I think they often see sustainability as people traveling less and therefore runs against their interests. And in a lot of cases, that's not true. Rather than, the cheapest option to get between, say, London and Paris is probably a flight. The most sustainable option is to take the Eurostar, and that often costs more. And ultimately, that's in a travel company's interest if they're taking higher revenue. So, simple example, but definitely one we're seeing. Or in other case, if we're talking about less business class usage, it's not that the company necessarily wants to cut down on business class, they just want to cut down on the emissions. So what airlines should start looking at is, okay, how can we start unbundling? Maybe we provide the premium meal experience, but keep them in a lower footprint seat. Maybe we can still upsell lounges. Maybe we can for on a TMC perspective, maybe we downgrade the travel class, but to make up for the traveler well-being, maybe we put them in a nicer hotel. So embracing nuance is such a great way to continue to drive revenue and to drive traveler well-being and sustainability. Everything can holistically come together, and I think those will be the winners in this industry.
So we talked a lot about business travel, and the tactics that corporations are doing. I mean, if we turn to leisure travel for our last couple of minutes here, I mean, yes, we've seen, the Greta effect, as you and I discussed before we went on air here, and we had flight shaming in mid 2019 in Scandinavia and many other things, and there is this general awareness raising, not least because of things like the COP26 conference in Glasgow about a month and a half ago. Do you sense overall that even leisure customers are being more discerning as much as, say, corporations want to be?
Unfortunately, I don't think so. I think if you go to an airport, if you go to Stansted and you see the number of people who are still traveling and want to take holidays, understandably, and want to choose the cheapest option, understandably, ultimately sustainability ends up taking it back first, and they say, well, other people, government should have to deal with it, business should have to deal with it, and to be honest, they're not wrong a lot of the time. And so I think on the leisure side, we really do have to see more government policy to try and lower emissions. This could be trying to make the price of airfares start to really reflect the emissions, so things like carbon taxes and carbon rebates, or it could just be better investment in high-speed rail, so it's easier to get to, say, southern Spain very quickly by a train. But that would require billions to be spent on, and that's ultimately a government thing. I don't want to say that consumers don't care. They do care, and there's certainly flight shaming, particularly in the Nordics, did have a bit of an effect. But I think ultimately it's government and business that will need to really drive this, rather than them pushing that responsibility onto consumers who, understandably, particularly after a pandemic, are quite concerned about finances.
So last of all, Kit, I mean, I moderated a panel at the PhocusWire conference that your co-founder was at in November, and one of the questions that I asked one of the panelists was, if you were the head of Global Travel PLC, if such an organization existed, what would be the first thing that you would do if on the sustainability agenda? And he's, I'm paraphrasing, this is Jeremy Sampson, the Travel Foundation, I'd just get rid of marketing. The $12 billion a year that Expedia and Booking.com spends on digital marketing with Google, they could spend that on things that maybe speak to slightly more sustainable practices. I'm not going to ask you to agree with him, maybe you do, but I mean, what role do you think some of these giant organizations have and should do?
I think that's a great response. Maybe oversimplified, but ultimately, so many people are making their purchasing decisions on sustainability. So yeah, rather than just advertising, why not spend $1 billion in a year on sustainability, and that would move the needle and immediately make a large travel company one of the most sustainable in the world. So I do think that's great. Ultimately, I think my answer is on a very similar page. People are making decisions on sustainability. Invest in it. Invest in it, and it will start paying dividends. And I think it will start paying dividends much sooner than people think. We're not talking a 10-15 year horizon to get a return. We're talking in the next couple years, people starting to really spend with their wallets, businesses especially spending with their wallets. And government regulation is coming. And I think a lot of companies need to wake up to this, that they might be scrambling to play catch up. Airlines might be scrambling to source enough sustainable aviation fuel when sustainable aviation fuel minimum requirements start coming in. So invest now, otherwise you're going to be stuck down the line.
Right. Again, we encourage people to go to the Thrust Carbon website and see some of the things that you're doing. Once again, congratulations on your Hot 25 selection this year. And last of all, Kit Brennan from Thrust Carbon, thanks for joining us on PhocusWire Pulse.
Thank you, Kevin.
Hello and welcome, everyone. And Mark, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So when we talk about emerging innovation, certainly blockchain is a word that seems to come up in a part of every conversation lately, and it's the basis of what we're going to discuss in these next 15 minutes. But let me start with some background about Coras. Mark, that's the company you founded in 2015, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so you're based in Dublin, Ireland, a global distribution platform that enables travel and other e-commerce brands to sell tickets for events and activities on their websites. And I know some of the companies you work with are Ryanair and Japanese online retailer Rakuten that use your API to sell tickets for major sporting events, theater shows, concerts, and attractions such as the London Eye. Do I have that generally correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Single API for the world's events and activities. Yeah.
Perfect. So I know it was through your work developing Coras that you came up with this idea to reinvent loyalty based on the idea that in the future, every brand would have its own token that would serve as a blockchain-based token that would serve as its form of loyalty currency. Before we get into more details about that idea and how it would work, can you tell us briefly, what do you view as some of the problems with existing loyalty schemes?
Well, I suppose, like, as someone who, I suppose, pre-pandemic was on a plane sort of two to four times a week, you know, from a consumer point of view, we think there's a number of issues. You know, lack of interoperability, you know, so points earned in one program can't be spent on another. So reducing customer choice of what they can redeem their points for. There's no transferability from one points holder to another. Points tend to expire on a periodic basis, depending on the partner, you know, usually leading to these sort of crazed consumer efforts to maintain a particular program status. And, you know, from both the issuer and the customer point of view, the earning and redemption of points is quite a manual process with like significant resources required. And that locks out brands who might want to run a loyalty program, but don't have the resources to do it. And also loyalty schemes sit as a liability on the balance sheet of the issuer. So, you know, there's definitely issues at the consumer side and obviously on the issuer side as well.
Okay, so help us understand how a blockchain-based, or what's known as DeFi, that's decentralized finance, token can address these limitations.
Sure, yeah, so there's a token standard in DeFi called ERC20. And so they all basically run off the same sort of back-end infrastructure. And so ERC20 tokens address these issues. So there is interoperability. So tokens earned in one program could be spent in another. There is transferability. Not only the tokens don't expire, but also have the possibility of increasing and of course decreasing in value. And there's increased automation for earning and redemption of tokens. So as the issuer, you don't have to go and like agree deals with how many points in one program can be spent in another partner program. As the consumer has, you know, can convert to their preferred token and choose where to spend.
Okay, can you walk us through an example of what this might look like, let's say for a travel brand, like a hotel company?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So, you know, the next big trend we think is sort of these Web2 brands evolving their businesses to Web3. So you're seeing it with Kickstarter last week, you know, talking about building an open source protocol for crowdfunding, or last month, you know, Starbucks exploring how to tokenize their rewards program for their 25 million members. You know, it's pretty interesting from where we're coming from. So the key is having a user experience that brands can get their customers into Web3 without having to say, this is blockchain or DeFi. So the consumers realize it's just a better version of a product they're already used to. Similar to, say, the transition of booking a product over the phone to being able to book it online. And loyalty is a product consumers understand why it's such a good entry point into Web3. So how this would work for a hotel company is they basically decide the exchange rate. So let's say one token for every dollar spent. The token allocations are sort of loosely referred to as, you know, tokenomics. So the consumer would book a hotel room as normal, get their email confirmation, but they would get, in the way that we built it anyway, a second email saying, welcome to Hotel Loyalty Program. You've been allocated 100 tokens for your $100 purchase. So to activate your digital wallet so you can access these tokens, please click here. And that basically takes the customer to their digital wallet, again, a native Web2 experience where their tokens are stored. They add a PIN to their email and they create their account. And that Web2 customer is now a Web3 customer. And, you know, at the moment, there are about just over 4 million DeFi users with about $100 billion stored in these protocols. And, you know, if we think if a travel brand can start to convert their customers in this simple manner, travel could be, you know, one of the first major industries to have mass market Web3, you know, adoption because of the volume and the volume of customers and daily transactions. You know, broader crypto adoption is tracking internet adoption with just over 100 million users at the moment. So we're at sort of 1998 levels in terms of adoption cycle. So it's very exciting. And hotels are a really good example as they can use a token-based loyalty scheme as an incentive for consumers to book directly with them instead of through, like, say, an OTA, for example, and that would increase their margins.
Okay, wow, there's a lot to unpack there. So let me just ask some follow-up questions. So from the consumer standpoint, let's look at it from that first.
Yeah.
So a hotel company is using this. What would be some of the benefits then for me as a consumer using this system?
Yes, so similar to what on the consumer side, you know, we think the benefits are pretty obvious. You know, interoperability, transferability, tokens that don't expire and can increase in value, an automated earning and redemption process. And from a brand point of view, you know, our experience with Chorus obviously is seeing different product categories like hotels, car hire, aggregated into a single API. So in travel, where the same products are available across multiple different websites, a token-based loyalty program gives customers reason to buy from them. And then there's also the benefit of automated earning and redemption. And, you know, brands as token holders, you know, they benefit from the increase in token value. And there's also a transaction fee for converting one token to another, which is shared pro rata amongst the token holders. So the brand typically at the start certainly will have the biggest, you know, will be the biggest token holder. So they'll have a new revenue stream that isn't available to them at the moment.
Okay. And as far as that piece around interoperability and transferability and all that, so for me as the traveler, then I could be earning tokens, let's say through hotel brand X, and potentially use them to book a room at hotel brand Y. I mean, is that potentially?
Yeah, like it's even more, I suppose, exciting than that. You could be earning, let's say, tokens through your local, like say, supermarket, and you can convert those tokens into the hotel token. Because these tokens are basically tradable and they're freely exchangeable. It puts all the sort of the power back into the consumer, going like, if you think of the amount of loyalty programs you would sign up for historically, and then you don't have enough points then to, you know, to then spend, you know, you haven't got enough points to spend it on anything, and then they just sit sort of there essentially unused. Where now what you'll be able to do is go, actually, I'll convert those into a program that I have a loyalty system that I am using. So it's just a completely different, you know, situation for the customer.
And so what does that potentially mean for the brand? I mean, certainly there's a giving up of some control there on the part of brands that would use this, correct?
Yeah, like I think, like, you know, if we're realistic, you know, we don't think that, you know, the biggest loyalty schemes are going to move from a centralized system to a decentralized system overnight. But what we do think is possible is that they might say, for example, run it for a particular product. So obviously our pitch is from Chorus is to be able to say, well, you know, events and activities, $200 billion industry. You know, we've obviously connected the Chorus API product to the Fighter product. So if you want to have essentially a new ancillary revenue stream with the DeFi loyalty product attached, that's available to you, you know, sort of from day one. And that might be an entry point from that point of view. But we think obviously there's lots of brands that don't have loyalty schemes because they are capital intensive to run, or they're just not that interesting to the customer. It's like, you know, if you buy a product from us, you can then buy more products from us. You know, people are buying products from all across the web. So you need a loyalty scheme needs to reflect what consumer behavior is. And it doesn't really do that at the moment.
So talk a bit about how do you start to get adoption of this concept, you know, and where could some of the challenges come in? Yeah,
sure. So existing, you know, established loyalty brands, loyalty schemes, they do make a lot of money for some brands. You know, in the US, especially, banks are paying brands, you know, billions of dollars annually so their customers can earn points based on their credit card spend. So as I mentioned, it will be difficult to move those brands. So, but I said they might try it, run them side by side. But, you know, we think the initial adopters will probably be brands that don't have an existing loyalty program, if we're being honest. But that's okay. But I think that the consumer experience is going to be so much better under a decentralized loyalty program than it is under a centralized one. It's the same way, like, you know, if you look at, like, my background was like sort of coming from music, and, you know, if you look at the shift of, say, from, you know, where the power lay with say record shops, and then the power went direct to consumer. It's a change in technology that empowers the consumer. And I think, you know, so we think if you're operating a centralized loyalty program and your competitor is operating a decentralized one, you know, the comparison will become pretty big quite quickly, we think.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so for, let's say, potentially a company, a brand that doesn't currently have a loyalty scheme, you're saying they might be some of the early adopters. Talk us through a bit about how do you create this, like on the technical side of it and the back end side of it? How is that what you would do then? Or how would a brand start living in this world of a DeFi loyalty program?
Yeah, so because it's still like DeFi is a relatively new product and blockchain is still a relatively new product, we're aware of the fact that having something to show a customer or a brand and go, this is how it's going to work, is really, really important. So what we're doing basically is we're going to launch our own loyalty token in the new year, which we're calling FIDA. And the idea is it will act as a showcase for brands on how the whole end-to-end consumer experience will work. And as I mentioned, we've connected FIDA to the Chorus API, so you have the sort of combined Web 2 and Web 3 products sort of together. And then we'll also, we'll also be partnering with brands who might want to say, even have it even further distance away, and we'll issue FIDA tokens for maybe a product that they're operating. But to get up and running essentially is that the same infrastructure that will be behind FIDA token will be the same infrastructure behind any partner token. So we can essentially mint, a partner comes to us and says, we'd like to have a loyalty scheme. They decide the tokenomics, what the earning rate per customer is, and also what the allocations are. And then essentially we'll mint that token and then it will be available. So it will be quite a straightforward process. The piece that we will have to build next year is having an API that then those brands can obviously, because obviously it's great that it connects to Chorus, but if those brands want to connect it to one of their own e-commerce products, whatever it is, and we'll have an API that will enable that to happen. But that's sort of our MVP is more sort of just showing how it works in our existing ecosystem, so to speak.
Okay, what are you hearing as you're talking to brands and companies? And of course, specifically, I'd be curious if anyone in the travel space. I mean, what is your sense of interest and willingness to take this on?
I think there's a combination of things. I think there's a combination of sort of intrigue and fear in terms of fear of something new, in terms of how is this going to work, how is this going to impact us, and obviously there's been a lot of it's probably been the biggest year in terms of consumer adoption for crypto as a whole, and that can only be a good thing. And I think that there's definitely from some of the we're obviously trying to talk to people who have an expertise in loyalty, and from some of the people we've been speaking to, they definitely think there's an opportunity here in terms of with their experience within the loyalty industry. So I think that there's a lot of people going, like, listen, with any new technology, no one wants to be first and no one wants to be last. So we think from our point of view, we'll have a product up and running. We're in ongoing discussions with a number of partners at the moment. So we'll have a few initial partners live, and then that just creates confidence that it's like, oh yeah, this is okay. This is, as I said, the key thing is almost like it's just a better version of an existing product. And the fact that it's using in the same way that, people don't say I'm using the internet to buy something. You're just going like, I'm buying a product online, because and the technology behind it doesn't really matter. And we think that's the shift that's going to happen. So we think that, yeah, there's definitely an appetite for brands to have their own, to get involved in blockchain, get involved in DeFi. But also, like, there is an education process. Like I've spent pretty much the whole year trying to get my head around it. And there's a lot of concepts and a lot of different terminology and stuff like that. So we think we've got a good experience of working with bigger brands and bringing new technology to them. And so, yeah, so it's just an education process for both the partner and the brands involved. And that's where we think some of our strengths will be.
Okay, and just briefly before we wrap up here, last few seconds, give me a sense, how confident are you that this is going to take hold? And just a guess on the timeline. Are we talking 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? What's your outlook?
Well, I'm very confident in terms of the core technology behind it. Like, as I said, that figure earlier on about 4 million users and $100 billion of value locked in,
right.
That kind of gives you an idea of what the scale is. The fact that it's tracking, internet adoption pretty much, if you look at the lines, they're basically identical. So you're sort of 1998 levels. But, it's like, if you think about it, like, I remember trying to listen to streaming a baseball game in 1999, and it was a terrible experience through Real Player. And, and then YouTube launches 4 years later. So, the technology can move pretty quickly. And so I wouldn't like to make any guesses in terms of how long this will take, but from to me, at a high level, is loyalty a great consumer experience at the moment? No. Does this technology facilitate a better consumer experience? Yes. So it's really just sort of filling the gaps between getting from where we are now to there.
Yeah, It'll sounds to me as though if it happens the way you're describing, it'll be one of those things that we look back at some point and go, this was so obvious, kind of. So,
well, you know, I spend most of my time going, is this as obvious as we think it is? And, you know, so that's why, you know, we want to speak to as many potential partners as possible and go, well, actually, here's the reality on the ground of how our loyalty program works. And, you know, how do we get around this? Because for us, then that gives us the roadmap of what we need to build as well.
yeah. All right. Wonderful. Well, we are out of time. Certainly we'll be following to see as this develops. So Mark, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Mitra. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Welcome, I'm Jill Menz, news editor at PhocusWire. And for this session on new roles and strategies for destinations, I'm joined here with Sigga, who is head of Visit Iceland. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So I want to start with kind of looking back at how Iceland has positioned itself amid the pandemic. You know, I think you had a strong aim to attract visitors who were looking to take their first flight back overseas. Can you talk a bit about your thinking there and how you were positioning the destination?
Yes, sure. What we did was during the pandemic, we tried to keep the conversation going with messages which addressed the situation we were all in. And we tried to offer something from Iceland to relieve the stress of that situation. So we had campaigns such as "Looks like you need to let it out," where we were reminding people to let out screams of frustration, and we broadcasted it into the Icelandic nature. And we also had a joy scrolling campaign, which was aimed to tackle the constant doom scrolling where people were doing on their phones, and offering joy scrolling, happy content from Iceland that you could joy scroll instead. So this is so we targeted our message towards first movers within our target group. But we tried to highlight how Iceland was one of the first countries to welcome visitors with testing at the borders in the summer of 2020, and also how Iceland opened up for US travelers and UK travelers outside of the Schengen area in April this year. So this is what we were trying to focus on.
Great, great. And did you employ any tactics that perhaps you had not used prior to the pandemic? You know, specifically looking at technology, did you use tech at all in different ways?
We have, of course, never had to market the destination when people can't travel. So that was a big challenge. So we tapped more into the social forces at play, and we tried to address that in our campaigns. And we used technology when we were in the joy scrolling campaign, for example. We had never used technology in that particular way. And also when we were broadcasting the sound into the Icelandic nature. So we used technology to try to convey this message in a new way.
Yeah. And you mentioned that, you know, Iceland was one of the first to welcome visitors again. And, you know, I just wondered if you can talk a bit more about that and how you were allowing people in, and also what trends you're seeing in travel that might continue into 2022. I think, you know, it's been mentioned that road trips were high, for example, as well as small group tours. Can you talk a bit about some of the trends you're seeing?
Well, from what we hear, then the travel trade is very optimistic about 2022, and we see that travel trends will in some respects return as they were before COVID, for both group tours and individual traveling. And there seems to be a trend towards staying longer in the destination. We are seeing that in this year, and we hope that that will continue in next year. And also for local experiences and sustainability, that seems to be top of people's minds.
Great. And looking at past events that have affected the region, you know, you had the volcanoes, I think it was 2018, that impacted the region. You know, how did that prepare you at all for the pandemic? And how perhaps did your strategy kind of mirror what you've done in the past, or perhaps how is it different for the pandemic versus past major events that have impacted the region?
Well, the nature of Iceland is the biggest draw for visitors, and living with its challenges and benefits has shaped the character of Icelanders through the centuries. And this has resulted in a resourceful spirit and an attitude which we call "Þetta reddast," and that means basically things will sort out in the end. And our strategies have built on this, and they continue to do that. So we need to be agile because of things can change really quickly here in Iceland. And we need to be resourceful. And that has meant that we did not have to change how we operate very much. So we were able to draw on that character and experience.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another concern that has been in Iceland, though, was this idea of over-tourism, prior to the pandemic, with too many people almost coming to the destination. Do you have concerns of over-tourism again once we're past COVID? And how do you kind of strike the balance of wanting to get people to Iceland, but also preserving the destination?
Well, access to Iceland is and it will always be limited by the amount of flights offered and hotel beds. We are an island, so there are limits to how many people can fly here. Mm-hmm. And in Iceland, there are a few places that are more frequently visited than others, but Iceland is a very big country with an abundance of sites all around the country. We saw a very fast growth in the last decade, and that contributed to this narrative about over-tourism being in Iceland. We grew from 500,000 in 2010 to 2 million in 2018 and 19. But 65% of the growth was out of the high season. And we saw visitors traveling further and staying longer all around the country. So I think we have a much stronger infrastructure in Iceland to cater for visitors that are coming. So I'm not very worried about over-tourism being a problem in Iceland.
Got it. Good, then we can all go visit. It sounds there's a lot of places to go. So, I mean, and just on attracting people, one recent advertisement you released, which was pretty funny, was a take at Mark Zuckerberg and this whole idea of the metaverse. I encourage anybody who's listening to check it out. It's really funny. But can you talk a little bit about that idea and the response it's received?
Yes, I can say this was the quickest turnaround ever on a campaign. So we were working basically on another idea. When the creative team saw the metaverse video, and of course it was everywhere. And metaverse is this vast virtual world to inhabit and explore. And we thought this would be a really fun way to talk about the reality that is Iceland and to showcase what Iceland has to offer to travelers, but without using VR goggles. So basically a week after the idea came first, then we launched the video. We managed to, do all of the work there in between. And the video went viral and was covered in media outlets all around the world. We've seen over 1,000 coverages and 5.5 billion global impressions. The video has been viewed over 6 million times, and we have received so much positive feedback from people saying they want to visit after seeing the video. And the best response was probably when Mark Zuckerberg himself commented on the video, saying he loved it and wanted to visit the Iceland very soon. And we were over the moon when we saw that. I'm very happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you seen any initial data that has indicated that people have booked flights already, or more website visits, or anything else that can translate into people actually planning and booking their travel?
We don't have that data ready right away, but we have never felt as much overwhelming, positive feedback for any campaign that we've done. And we were so happy to see that people didn't just love the video. They were saying this actually makes us want to come to Iceland, which is, of course, the aim of it. So we were very happy to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and you kind of Iceland has a history of sort of these comedic advertising takes. Can you talk a bit about some that you've employed in the past and how that sort of has set you apart as a destination for these funny videos?
Well, we are, of course, a small country with a small budget compared to our competitors. So humor has helped us to cut through the noise and our messaging. And humor can also be a great ally when you need to connect to people and get them to engage. We have tried to use this in our campaigns. A few years ago, for example, we had a campaign called Ask Guðmundur, where there's a lot of people called Guðmundur in Iceland, my father, for example. And we created the first human search engine. So people could send questions to Iceland and some random Guðmundur around Iceland would answer. And we got a very positive response to that. Actually, Barack Obama, he was president at the time. He mentioned this in a speech, which we were also really happy about. But we have very many campaigns like that where we try to use humor to convey our message.
Yeah. Is there any ultimate celebrity you could get to endorse Iceland that should be on your radar?
I don't know. That's such a big question.
There's probably some you don't want to, so it's balanced. Great. Yeah, so I just want to turn a little bit back towards sustainability and talk about some of the sustainability efforts that you've been looking at going into the new year. And specifically, maybe if you could talk a bit about how tech can help fuel these sustainability efforts.
Yeah, well, Iceland has the future vision of becoming a leading country in sustainability in 2030. And the Icelandic government has set and importantly legalized the goal of carbon neutrality by 2040 and has put forward a financed climate action plan. So there's a lot of emphasis on these things in Iceland now. And today, 100% of electricity produced in Iceland comes from renewable sources. 70% from hydropower and 30% from geothermal, which of course positively impacts the quality of life in Iceland for citizens and also for travelers. And this saves a great deal of carbon emissions and money. So there's a lot of infrastructure that is focused on this and tech development is focused on this sustainable goal of Iceland in whole. And at our website, visiticeland.is, people can read about the sustainable travel, in particular in Iceland, and for example, calculate their carbon footprint and offset. And we have also created campaigns to encourage sustainable and responsible travel behavior. Iceland was the first country in the world to introduce a tourism pledge called the Icelandic Pledge. And we also had a few years back a campaign called Kranavatn, where we were highlighting the benefits of the tap water in Iceland. So this is embedded in everything that we do to try to highlight how you can travel sustainably and be responsible in Iceland.
Right, right. From the consumer perspective, are you seeing this becoming more of a priority? Are you seeing more people sort of demanding that from the travel that they're doing, the travel providers that they're working with? How are you seeing consumer perspective shift? And also, are you still seeing it more relegated in Europe? And are you seeing it branch out to other countries such as the US, for example?
I see this is a definite trend that is emerging. I think it will only go stronger. We are seeing more conscious travelers, and they really want to travel to responsible destinations that have responsible messaging and have these options at hand. So we can feel that, you know, both from consumer, but also from the companies that we're dealing with. And if you want to stand out from the competition as a tourism company, you really need to have these things in order. And there are more and more companies that are setting the sustainability agenda and policy. And I think this will be a very strong trend.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the destinations and travel providers are communicating their efforts, because, you know, if it from a consumer perspective, if you're not looking, you need to know somehow. So I think that's definitely a big push, is that needs to be communicated. So I just want to wrap up with one final question on what else is in store for Iceland in 2022. Maybe more funny videos, maybe more, you know, what else do you have in store looking ahead to the new year?
Well, it might be that we're working on the next campaign that we hope to launch early 2022. But of course, I can't say anything about it right now. But we hope it will be well received. And there's a lot of optimism for tourism in Iceland in 2022. We see a lot of bookings. And I think Iceland is top of mind for people coming out of COVID. That is what we are trying to put emphasis on during the pandemic, to maintain the conversation even when people couldn't travel. Like I said earlier, we wanted to remind people of Iceland, bring them something positive from Iceland, and in the hope that people will choose Iceland as the first destination when they start to travel again.
Absolutely. Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Kevin. Hey, Pete. Nice to see you. Okay,
Yes.
slightly unusual
Cheers.
one. This Pete normally joins us at the end of our Pulse events to say farewell and run through a couple of things that are going on at PhocusWire and PhocusWrite, and Pete will do that at the end here. But what we thought for this last one of the year, given that we're kind of doing a look forward at some of the emerging innovation, is you and I to have a discussion. We've both been in this space for a long time, and we're just on the back of our first in-person event for almost 2 years at the PhocusWire conference back in November, which was terrific. So I thought it would be useful for us to kind of chat through some of the trends that were going on there. So let's talk a little bit about that event then. So what would you say were some of the standout bits of innovation that you saw over the course of our 2 pitching events? Those of the people that are tuning in that are unfortunate enough not to have been to our flagship event each year. And we do 2 pitching events. One is Launch, which is for established companies, and one is for Summit, which is for startups. But over the course of that day, which you're intrinsically involved in, Pete, on stage for that, I mean, what would you say were some of the standout bits of innovation per se?
Yeah, so I think you made it easy on us to some degree as we were looking at the Summit companies to really pick a nice variety of companies that and technologies that we think will impact the ecosystem as we move forward. So we saw accessibility, which obviously is something that I think remains a pretty big opportunity. Nobody's fully cracked it yet. So we had Wheel the World on stage, which was really a good way to kick it off. Business travel tech was there. We saw live e-commerce, video shopping. Of course, quite a few applications of hospitality tech, which I don't think surprises anybody. Hospitality is a part of the market that, that is always in desperate need of innovation and also represents kind of that margin opportunity that startups are looking for in order to gain some traction and some cash flow. InsurTech and FinTech, I think, those are 2 categories that, I suppose unsurprisingly found their way to the stage, and we can talk a little bit about that as a trend as we move forward. We saw a couple of new platforms. Creator economy made it to the stage. Road trips, so quite a nice variety of companies. I think accommodations is one category that maybe we can touch on a little bit. So, MyStay was a company that offers that contactless guest experience. And I think, you've covered that on PhocusWire. We've covered that at Focusrite as really a trend that is certainly going to carry us through the pandemic and the recovery. And, contactless may become the new 5-star hospitality. That's something that, we're keeping our eyes on. I don't think any of us are excited to be greeted by a big welcome crew at our next hotel stay. It's much more about how do we get from our shuttle or transportation up to the room as seamlessly as possible, and so we're seeing some innovation around that. InsurTech, FinTech. So insurance obviously was a category that. That was supported in many ways by this area of uncertainty and, represents an opportunity for companies to come in and aggregate insurance providers and really help kind of match the right insurance product with what the traveler is looking for. FinTech, UTip was the winner of Summit. So UTip is a kind of a cashless tipping service that really has applicability. How many of us have arrived at a hotel and had our bags delivered to our room and not had any cash in our pocket? So that one's kind of a no-brainer, but the bigger opportunity there is really buying anything through QR codes and making that kind of process really, really seamless. One thing before I hand it back to you, Kev, I think corporate travel tech, we saw TripKicks on stage and Jeff, we've been following Jeff for a couple of years, really trying to kind of drive people to adoption. And he's recently added, messaging around safety and security. But we didn't see a lot of other corporate tech, which, Spot Nana was on stage. We saw Trip Actions. That was a really nice interview with Ariel Cohen. But I think corporate travel is really going to represent an opportunity as we move forward because it's really being rewritten. The rules are being rewritten in corporate travel, and that migration from unmanaged to managed, I think we're going to see a lot of that And the companies like TripActions and TravelPerk are really well positioned to pick up some of that kind of, demand from travelers that are used to using consumer tech. And, it's a lot easier to migrate to a platform that's really been built to scale and built to kind of, easily accommodate that adoption and shift between, unmanaged to managed.
Would you agree, Pete, that, perhaps the days of massive consumer-facing innovation are largely gone by the wayside, because the true innovation from a technical perspective comes probably from vendors and business to business suppliers of technology to the industry? In other words, we've seen new business models and new segments such as what Airbnb and Uber have done with things, but that's probably it. Or is that too broad a kind of a bit of analysis?
Well, I think it remains to be seen, right? So who's the next Airbnb that's going to kind of, come out of this really challenging time for the industry? And we all know that entrepreneurs thrive during times of crisis and uncertainty. So in some ways, I think there's probably some space for innovation in B2C. But it is a tough road to hoe. It's really challenging. I mean, you look at Hopper, right? Like, how long did Fred spend trying to figure out how to really build an effective B2C play? And he ends up really taking his B2C business, which he's admitted he hasn't really made a whole lot of money on, and kind of pivoted it to this, fintech, insurtech thing. And now he's trying to sell it back to the industry and really doubling down on that B2B opportunity as the way to kind of reach the massive scale that he sees as an opportunity. And even companies like Booking. I mean, we've covered Booking and their acquisition of Get a Room, and that's an indication of one of our biggest B2C players really looking at the B2B opportunity, and they're going to pull that asset into Priceline and look at how to kind of build out some partnerships, leveraging all the inventory they have and all the the technology chops they have from test and learn to everything that they do. So it's interesting to follow, but there's plenty of challenges in our industry that need to be solved from a B2B perspective. So I think startups kind of look and say, wow, how come this doesn't work the way it should work from behind the scenes? And I think we're going to continue to see a lot of B2B come into the market and try to address some of the, the legacy technology challenges that we have.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say, it took Fred and Hopper a long time, and some of us are old enough to remember when it was called Open Places for quite some time, when it was in stealth mode. But that's probably another story for Fred to explain. I mean, one of the things that's quite interesting, and you hear people forever talking about it, is this digital transformation that has been going on for quite some time, but has been accelerated over the last 2 years just through virtue of people like you and I talking constantly on Zoom, where just everything is a lot more digital. I think some PhocusWire research says there's been a 5% jump in online travel penetration globally in 2020. As a result of that, do you sense then, Pete, that we are finally going to achieve some kind of, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, true personalization?
Well, it's funny. I was looking back through the PhocusWire research archives, and I think we covered personalization back in 2011, and we said now is the time for true personalization, and it's taken us quite some time. But I do think we're really shifting into this period where there's obviously massive amounts of data out there. Actually, one thing that's a little surprising that we didn't hear on stage was we didn't hear a lot of companies talking about AI and machine learning, and maybe it's become table stakes to some degree. I'm not sure why we didn't hear much of that, because I think we're kind of shifting into this period where somebody that can really harness data and leverage it to create a more personalized experience, and also you look at Room Price Genie, who we've also been following for a while, and they're pulling in they're pulling in data to help small to medium sized hotels, independent hotels manage their pricing and revenue. On the airline side, we have Camber. All of these are Hot 25 companies that are really using AI and machine learning to help airlines revenue manage. So we're seeing a lot of that in the market. We just didn't hear much of it on stage.
I wonder, to that point though, Pete, for fear of going off topic a little bit, I wonder if just machine learning and AI are intrinsic parts of the way we conduct, or businesses conduct, things now. We were forever talking about it for the previous 3 or 4 years, and now it is just part of the makeup of how people do things. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's certainly a big part of the ecosystem, and companies realize that no longer can they build kind of a machine-based algorithm that just is heavy computing. They need to really learn off what travelers are doing, and companies are really having to reinvent themselves around that. I actually had lunch with the new CEO of Switchfly just after the conference, and he comes from a strong machine learning AI background, and we had a really funny conversation because he's trying to figure out why travel hasn't really adopted this, because he sees the big opportunity across all the brands that he's working with. And I said, well, you've got to peek under the hood a little bit and see what you're up against, because there's just a lot of barriers to really kind of finding these data sets that are going to allow you to really be truly personalized as you're engaging with your customer.
Okay, so we've just got a couple of minutes left. I mean, I'd like us to touch on sustainability. So for me, the session that I hosted at the conference on sustainability just personally was one of the best things that I think I've ever done on stage at a PhocusWire conference, just because it was, I sense, made people sit up and listen. And we've talked about sustainability with Kit from Thrust Carbon earlier in today's Pulse. I mean, to the point that we've all been talking about it, and often at times over the last 2 years, we haven't had a lot of chance to do much else. So there is that opportunity to talk about it and think about it. It's another overused phrase, but is this an inflection point of both the industry realizing that it should do something, and also consumer pressure about to come onto the industry to really do something about it?
I like to think so, Kevin. And as a research-driven business, I think we'll see, and we plan to do a lot more research around sustainability in 2022. We have done some research lately, and it's certainly raising in to the top of mind of travelers. So they're telling us that they will fly less. They will look for other modes of accommodation or of transportation, but they may not be willing to pay for some of the carbon offsets and some of the initiatives. On the hotel side, they're certainly looking for more eco-friendly options, but are they likely to pay for really kind of driving those sustainability? Who knows? We'll see. And we plan to do some survey work around it. But I think, it's here. The industry's starting to adopt it. Thrust Carbon's doing a lot of great things to help raise that awareness and make it really simple for travel companies to take steps towards that. And I think that's the key, where, the traveler side, we'll see if travelers are willing to pay a little bit more to really help kind of give back. I think that in some ways remains to be seen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously in the last year and a half or so, we saw the emergence of Travelist, which was that organisation fronted by Prince Harry from my neck of the woods, although he's in your neck of the woods these days, which was a coalition of, as Booking.com, as Skyscanner, Trip.com, a group of companies trying to raise the profile of sustainability into the wider industry. So again, it remains to be seen as to whether that has an impact. So normally this is where I hand over to you and you start talking about some of the things that we're about to do. So the floor is yours for the last minute or so here, Pete.
Yeah. So, I think it'll be really interesting to follow. There's a lot of predictions about what next year looks like, and as hopefully we start seeing some real recovery around the world. We see it in pockets and pent up demand. It'll be interesting to see how much we kind of migrate back. We heard Peter O'Connor in lovely cynical manner, saying, "Look, I have no doubt that the OTAs are going to go back to spending, $6 billion on Google marketing, because they know how to acquire customers." And our friend Jeremy Sampson from sustainability, Jeremy, talk about how the OTAs could really make an impact if they just take some of that money that they spend on marketing and bring it over to to helping kind of build back fresher. So, I think digitization is here to stay. We're going to see a lot more of that. Certainly we're going to moderate from that 5% increase that we saw, but I think those businesses that can really embrace digital are really going to be the ones that come out of this with some nice nice tailwind.
Okay, so we'll still be here next year. So tell
Yes.
us what PhocusWire is up to next year, if you can.
Yeah, so we're excited to to bring the industry back in person. We'll be in Amsterdam again the last week of June. So we've really missed having our face-to-face event in Europe, and we're fairly optimistic, I'd say, at this point that we'll be able to host that event in June. We're back in Phoenix at our traditional dates, middle of November for the Focusrite Conference Global. Excited to do more Pulse events next year. We have 4 of them scheduled every quarter. Of course, our research agenda is packed full, so we'll continue to kind of push forward with that. It's been a challenging year for all of us. I know I'm ready to take a little bit of time off here over the next couple of weeks. I know you are as well, Kev. So thanks for all that you do, and thanks for putting these events together. I think they've really kind of found their place in the market, and people enjoy listening to these really insightful interviews.
Okay, I couldn't have said it better myself, or indeed have the modesty to say it better myself. So all it goes for me to say is, on behalf of Pete and myself, all the teams at Focusrite and PhocusWire, a very Merry Christmas to you all. Happy holidays, and we wish you all the best for 2022. Thanks for joining us on this Focuswire Pulse, which was sponsored by Travelport. Thank you very much, everybody.